I'm Jeff John East with RedJack, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Service Support Environment and Change Configuration and Asset Management Update session. A few quick announcements beforehand. We've got a mic right here, just as y'all have seen in all the other theaters. I think they've balanced out the actual audio so you don't have to scream into them anymore. Regardless, there's far fewer people, so please don't scream into them because then you're going to be blasting our presenter here. So in addition to that, this will be an hour-long session, and it does actually qualify for credit. So if you want to get your badge scanned, please see Regina Dull at the back after the session is over. I don't see where she's not here right now, but whenever she is, I will point her out. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce this morning's speaker, who is Drew Yannick. He is Chief in Information Technology Services Management Division. Mr. Yannig's a lead for the DISA Service Support Environment and Global Service Desk Consolidation. He's led a consolidation of over 22 geographic locations down to 5, which provided a savings of $51 million in cost reduction. And he has provided DISA with service for over 20 years now. So please welcome our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? Yeah, it sounds like it's working. Okay. All right, so as I was introduced, I am Drew Yanning. I'm the Chief of the IT Service Management Office. I'm not that close. Please don't go off again. I've been working for DISA for quite a while. Last 5 years, we've basically been doing IT service management. So I am the process guy who's charged with basically trying to reform and restructure many of the processes internal to DISA, which kind of reminds me of, there's this old story that goes around way back in the day. There was an engineer, a doctor, and a process person who were debating about which profession was the oldest on the planet. Yes, cue laughter there. Yes, someone's mind's going someplace it doesn't need to go, but that's okay. So the engineer held up that obviously in Genesis, there's a clue there. He says we can use Genesis and we can come up with which one is the oldest of the professions. And the doctor says, well, clearly in Genesis, it says that that God created woman out of Adam's rib. Therefore, medical must be the oldest profession. The engineer goes, oh, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. That's complete nonsense. Because look at what happened before that. Out of chaos, God created the universe. Surely a huge engineering feat. And then the process manager goes, I got you both beat. Who do you think created the chaos? So all jokes aside, yes, our job is a little bit to create chaos, and out of that chaos, so we like to call it creative destruction, ultimately yield a better process, a better function, hopefully at a cheaper cost. And with Global Service Desk and SSE, we actually have managed to do that. So far, the tally is about $51 million in reductions and about a 35% uptick in efficiencies and effectiveness. Now, some of you have noticed this if you're in our customer base. Some of the transition, there were some bumps in the road. That's the chaos I'm referring to. And we still have a few services that we have some ticks that we're working through and trying to get those things straight. But without further ado, let's go to the next slide. Oh, that's me. Pardon me. There you go. All right, here's your presentation disclaimer. I won't read it for you. Moving on. Okay, so basically about 3 years ago, the director of DISA said that we had too many service desk entities going on, and he wasn't even sure that he could quantify the cost of what it was to operate the service desk support for the DISA environments. At that time, there were about 108 service support environments in 22 different geographic locations. We were operating about 1,300 agents, and that obviously was quite expensive. We also had multiple ticketing systems, multiple approaches to how we were doing business, and really the effort was keyed on let's try to consolidate this into a single way of doing business and see if we can get our numbers down through cross-utilization of capacity. And, oh, by the way, Maybe we want to actually modernize how we're doing some of our service desk support because some of the techniques that we were using were kind of circa 1990 stuff, and service desk has come a long way since then. So we kicked off this project, and we essentially started getting out into the brass tacks. And what you're going to see in the following slides is more details about, essentially how we progressed, what the future is, and where we're headed next. So, as you can see, like I said, about 1,300 agents. We have 56 contracts into space, and we're working towards getting them all the way down to one contract and about 700 agents or so. And we are, for the most part, we've got a little bit of work to do on the super side still. For the most part, we're down to actually already one single technological environment. And so this becomes important. Part of what we were trying to do with Global Service Desk is as we said, we had about 1,300 agents in the space. A lot of those folks didn't have full utilization of capacity. So, for example, every single program that came online had its own acquisition strategy and brought with it essentially its own service desk. So everybody had a mid-shift, right? Everybody had a mid-shift. Well, how many phone calls do we typically get on the mid-shift? Not so much, right? We got a lot of time sitting around doing training, surfing the web, God forbid, watching movies. We all know how this goes, right, on the mid-shift, so on and so forth. Thought pattern was basically if you could leverage those agents in swings and mid-shifts, and you potentially could do a little bit of follow the sun model, you might be able to expand on that capacity, cross-train the agent, and then they can answer more than one type of phone call. That's essentially what we've been doing essentially for the last 3 years. And as a result, that's where we're getting a lot of our harvest down. Now, this is not to say that we're done. As you can see, we're kind of right there in the present zone, right? We're right there in the middle, and we still got a long ways to go. The agent base for DISA is, for the most part, contractor. There's a smidge of government in there, and so when we talk about those 56 contracts down to about 40 now, headed towards one, we've got a long road ahead of us still to try to get through all those consolidations. Further complicating the issues, many of our service desk contracts actually aren't just service desk, right? They have a sprinkling of things in them throughout, and service desk just happens to be one of those components. So obviously we're having to descope and restructure many of our contracts as we kind of head towards this particular thing. Now, part of what's not really talked about on this slide is the technological platform piece. So our developer, ID4, basically is working through and developing this single platform. And there's a whole series of contracts associated with that as well. And so we're going through a similar evolution on the technological side of that type of work as well, trying to get us down to essentially one contract-based management with one strategy towards one platform. So we still got a lot of work to do on both sides of the fence, but the good news is we've made significant progress. We've got 340-odd services still to go to be transitioned to get us to the 487 number. But so far, nearly everybody who has transitioned has actually seen an uptick in performance at lower costs, significantly lower costs. One other item that should be noted, we took a page out of industry's own book. In order to yield some of the cost savings we were looking for, we actually started relocating service desk from high-expense geolocs to lower-expense geolocs. So, for example, one of the major service desks that we had to incorporate was actually in the National Capital Region, which is about a plus 26% markup. We've moved that to Montgomery, Alabama, where we can leverage the same workforce at a much cheaper cost, mostly because the cost of living down there is actually significantly lower. On top of that, we're moving more and more of the government people out of the agent space. This is not to say that government people aren't good at this. It was more correctly a cost element, right? To do this with government people costs us roughly 3 times what I can buy it for in industry. So the industry partners that we have out there, you all are kind of key to helping us get these costs under control and lowering those bases. And, of course, the nice thing about having them on a contract is that we're really only paying for the hours that we use. The rest of it is really kind of up to them to manage. So moving on, those wondering about our tools and technology. I'm told by the lawyers that we didn't want to have all the big names up there, but essentially what it comes down to is that we have a contact management system, a global ticketing system, Yeah, element management system, self-help, knowledge-centered support, and more self-help from a scheduling perspective. To be specific, currently what DISA is using for contact management is a system called Customer Interaction Center, CIC, from Interactive Intelligence. And we're utilizing for global ticketing ITSM Remedy. We are in the process of working on the SIPR solution side. And the idea here is that when we start to integrate the CIC and the global ticketing system, that we'll actually start to be able to plug the element management systems directly into those and do auto ticket openings. So this is key for some of our initiatives in DISA, such as Comply to Connect. I don't know if you're familiar with Comply to Connect, but essentially Comply to Connect is a capability that every time you boot your laptop up on the network, it does a series of self-checks to make sure that you've done all of the IAVA compliance stuff that you're supposed to have done, that your McAfee stuff is running, your data protection layer is running, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't hit all of those items, it essentially puts you into a quarantine status, which is kind of like erecting a mini firewall around you. Well, when we're going through this process, as we're onboarding this, we essentially have about an 8-day window where they have 8 days to fix the problem. As DISA migrates to this, we're triggering a whole bunch of phone calls that are going into the service desk related to those types of things. The idea here is that in those particular cases, it'll be a don't call us, we'll call you scenario. The Comply Connect would trigger the alert, automatically open a ticket, put it directly into the queue. The agent then would contact the customer at their leisure, work the item off before the 8-day expiration, keeping the customer out of the quarantine window. So that's kind of some of the concepts that we're working with right now, and we're going to be trying to do more of that stuff. Really, the key here is to do a lot more call avoidance. Using C2C as another example. Self-help is another good key. There are many things that customers can do to self-heal or assist themselves prior to going into a quarantine status or even when they're out. So Knowledge Center support is playing a key role in that. And again, we're using ITSM Remedy for that. And the idea here is that we can start populating articles that users can use directly to support themselves. And in some cases, it's as simple as containing screenshots telling them where they need to go so that they can get the latest updates onto their machine. Or in some cases, even more complex technology perspectives where they can actually run scripts that would actually heal the particular application themselves. Some of the items that are also fall into self-help are a lot of the RFIs. Probably about 60% of our tickets today are RFIs, or 60% of our contacts are RFIs, which are requests for information. The more information we can make it available to the customer at their fingertips, the more phone calls we will obviously avoid. Because they call for basic questions. For example, as you heard earlier in the week, last week, Colonel Liggins, who's here with us today, gave us the Windows 10 update. Obviously, when Windows 10 is rolled out, we're going to experience a whole slew of phone calls that are related to, I've never used Windows 10 before, how do I find X? Yes, so the more kind of training we can do on that prior to the event, the less calls we'll get inside the customer service desk, right? So the key here is that we really want to manage to a mean inside the service desk, a mean contact basis that's a plus or minus 10%, somewhere in that range. We've got some services that are actually operating plus or minus 39% right now due to the stability in the service. And we're really trying to get all those things kind of under control so that the contact basis remains stable. Why is this important? Well, if you're a customer of DISA, one of the most expensive things you're getting from DISA is the service desk support because it requires manpower. The more control we can get on that, the lower the price can go. And some people have been asking us, well, where are we at with a rate-based structure for GST? Well, I'm happy to say the rate-based structure work has been done. We actually have a rate now. However, foot stomp, don't read into that. That means that we're selling service desk as a service. We're not. But we can tell you exactly, in support of the services you are buying, how much you're spending on service desk per year. And we can break that down for you to give you actual cost details, which is kind of marks the first time we've been able to do that. If you're familiar with the DISA cost modeling, it previously was based primarily on operating environments. The operating environment cost model will still exist, but you'll also be able to get granularity on a non-operating environment service desk model now that really is based on number of contacts. The more stable the service, the lower the cost, right? So that's kind of where we're headed and moving in that general direction. As you can see, the technology, it kind of starts to interrelate. So our Unified Contact Management, CIC, essentially it's our call queue. It allows our agents to be anywhere in the world. They can log into the call queue from anywhere. That frees us up to make business decisions about where we want to have people, primarily based on cost. It also enables us to actually take tickets out of ITSM Remedy and put them directly into the call queue as a controlled object. This becomes important because then we only have to have agents look at one queue. They're not working the ticketing queue at the same time that they're working the call queue and the email queue and the chat queue, right? Because CIC is multimedia, as I just mentioned, it also enables us to manage emails, chat, etc. Email is in full use today. Chat, we're basically standing up and should have operating probably in the May timeframe. We're initially standing it up to do RFIs only so that we can cut down the amount of chatter going into the service desk with regards to questions. But eventually we'll be utilizing that as the agents get more proficient in it to manage asynchronous sessions for troubleshooting. Other thing about chat is it provides the capability that you can actually provide links directly to knowledge articles. You can put pictures, for example, of what it is that they should be doing directly into the chat window. And all those things will kind of help the customer get over the threshold of what they can potentially do to help themselves. And we'll avoid questions like, we all have had the question in the service desk, I don't know where the start menu is. It happens. It happens even today. So that will certainly help those types of things. We already talked about the element management system also being linked to this. And so the idea here is that we're creating a mashup. We're still working on the mashup. Got a little ways to go. I'm looking at my ID4 developers here. We're still working on this. The plan here is that at some point the agents will be able to log in with a CAC card and it'll pull up kind of the mashup environment for the agents based on their profile. That way they're not having to manage multiple windows. Still got some more work to do on that. Primary delay is funding didn't quite come through on time, so we're still working through those pieces. Similar concept for Tier 0. So if you start thinking about Tier 0, and you noticed earlier we talked about 487 different services coming through Global Service Desk. Now you think about that for a minute. Let's be clear. Global Service Desk isn't structured in such a way that one agent answers all questions on all 470 applications. That would be really cool if you could find a guy that's smart, but that's not how it's structured. Essentially what we do is we set the agents up to be trained in various queues, and then they log into the various queues, and they're typically grouped into families of services. Wow. All right, now take that one step further. How do you want to do self-help for 487 services? Well, kind of the past pattern was, every little service has kind of their own portal. Well, that's really not the future for it, right? Future is that from a Tier 0 perspective, what we really want to do is enable a customer to log in using their CAC card. When they log in using their CAC card, we'll be able to actually go through the database that already exists to see what tickets they have open today. That ticket indication will give us a clear driver on what types of services they're already consuming. Then we can display pertinent data based on that knowledge or basis. This, coupled with our CRM database that we're working with BD, should provide additional information about the customer that we're dealing with on the phone and populate additional data that they might be interested in. Now, having said that, the idea here is that they would then be able to also drop down pods of other data and other services that they potentially are interested in, and they would also be able to see live status of service requests, incidents, etc., as well as knowledge articles all in the same portal. That way they can do self-help, and we avoid all of the calls that we get about what's the status of my incident, what's the status of my request, etc., etc. So that's kind of the theory. We got a lot more work to do to get to that work, but that's where we're headed. That's what we're trying to do. And that pretty much covers most of that. Now, having said that, you're all thinking, well, that's great, but you can only do this with good configuration management and understanding of how that's functioning. And, of course, incidents, as we all know, are triggered largely by change, right? It may be well-planned change. It may be not well-planned change. But we often have probably close to 80% of our incidents, or if you trace them down, came for something changed in the environment, whether it was intended or not, right? So you can see now that we've kind of got the canary in the coal mine, the service desk, we can start working backwards and start getting the data developed for change of configuration management. So the approach that we're using in the agency essentially is federate. You're not going to have one big configuration management database. It's not going to be one big thing, a $120 million project where we're going to redefine all the data elements and settle on a single database. We've got some significant investment we've already made in things like NICMR and other database-type tool sets. The idea here is to federate that view, rationalize it, and then display it so you could see it in one picture. Then you integrate the change of configuration management workflows into that so that as we're starting to process changes, decision makers can clearly see what the potential impact might be to the configuration environment. Is this easy? No. We've been working on this for, 8 years, something like that. Good news is we've made significant strides. NICMR was making significant strides on the telco side of the house. Now we're going to start working on the application layer and starting to add that piece to it. So now, anybody who's ever worked configuration management, raise your hand if you work configuration management, right? It's kind of asymptotic, right? You kind of get to a certain point where you're in the 90th percentile, but you never really finish, right? Because it's always changing and always evolving. So that's also something that we have to kind of acknowledge. So we'll be going through that. We're standing up change management workflows right now so that we can have a consolidated enterprise governance structure for change management. And that'll be part one. It will be using the existing configuration management capabilities that we have today. But as we get to that consolidated picture, those decision vectors will get smarter and smarter as we go down that road. If you want to know about the technical details, I invite you to stop by the ID4 booth. They can explain to you some of the visionary stuff that Mr. Travis and company have come up with and heading in that direction. I've got the people on the processes side of the house. They've got the technology side of the house, if people are wondering what's the relationship here. So a lot of work going on there. Couple things that are coming up that you should be aware of. We're going to be starting the summer of this work on kind of standardizing CIs and how we're going to be looking at CIs, incorporating NEAM as a data standard source. There's a working group that will be kicking off this summer. It's going to be comprised of industry, academia, and government folks to try to get a handle on what the total picture looks like and what our CIs should look like, and that will serve as a basis for where it is that we're potentially going with JIE in the future. So more to come on that scenario. If you're interested in that, I would ask that you could contact me directly, but the way it works typically is this. There'll be an RFI special notice if you're in industry, and then that special notice will trigger your participation, and then we'll have to play a level playing field for your participation. So more to come on that front. The other pieces that we're working on is actually the change management workflows. As we get closer to those things, our customer base is going to be very interested to know how that operates, because it does have a play in how we do request fulfillment and how we do service order processing. We're getting a pretty good handle on how we do that today. It's just not as streamlined and not as clear to the customer base what happened to their order. So part of the drill here is to get that status so that you can see live inside the portal where my order is today, who's got it, who's working it, has it gone through the Service Portfolio Council, is it now an approved service, those types of question marks. Those are the things that we're trying to get a handle on. Okay, moving on. Okay, obviously we'll be using 3 models in the change management process, essentially. And those who are familiar with ITIL are familiar with the nomenclature. Standard, normal, and emergency, right? So the standard changes will be the stuff that typically falls into kind of the request fulfillment territory and some others. There are other things such as IAVAs that are not request fulfillment but fall into the same category. Normal, which is our normal way of processing changes, and then we have a lot of things that fall into our emergency categories so that we can avoid doing things like controlled seizures. Those types of things come up. So that's essentially the starting point. We're using the DESMF as our basis, along with the risk management framework and NIST. Roy Hendricks, who's here in the audience today, wave your hand, Roy. He's on my team, and he's got the lead for that project. So if you want to get involved or get the dirty lowdown about what's going on with that and how that progress is happening, he can point you that out. On DesMIF, I got Karen Gomez in the audience. Karen, wave your hand. She's reluctant to. She's like, oh, really? Yeah. She's actually the lead editor for DesMIF. So if you have questions about what's in the DesMIF model and where DesMIF is going, she can point you in the right direction there. Okay, moving on. On the horizon, we've obviously gotten a handle on incident. It's actually pretty much under control at this point. Most of the issues that we're having on incident management now is the follow-on with problem management. Being able to actually tie together incidents into bundles and identify clearly objective problem managements for service owners to work through. I'd said earlier that basically the service desk is the canary in a coal mine, right? They're the ones who see the results of everything else that happened before it. Another way of putting it is they are also the victims of everything else that happened before it, right? In fact, I always like to, it always cracks me up because I always get this kind of mantra going, well, the service desk is horrible. Maybe. If the service desk agents are rude to you or don't know what they're doing and can't restore your service, then you're probably right. More often, the issue is that there's fundamentally something wrong with the service, and the service desk is having to deal with that. So it's more akin to a waiter in a bad restaurant, right? So if you don't think the fish is good, it isn't the waiter's fault, it's the cook. And that happens. Now the problem is, even in a restaurant, the waiter doesn't often provide that feedback to the cook. So the cook thinks it's good. He's making fish the same way every day, not knowing that everyone hates it. And they're like throwing it in the basket, and they're like, I'm not ordering that again. And his sales is going down and down and down. And the waiter is just like, I wish the cook would fix that, but he never says anything because he doesn't want to insult him, right? Well, that's what problem management is really all about. The idea here is we're the waiters, we see it. We should identify it to the service owners and say, hey, the customers really hate this, or it's really awkward, or it's not working. And we need to clearly identify that. What is it? Put some barriers around it and say, do you ever think about doing it differently? Maybe we need to do this, that, or the other thing. Service desk won't pretend to have the answer. They shouldn't. But we can at least identify the issue so the cook can go back and look at the recipe and go, oh, really? It said cayenne pepper. I wasn't supposed to be using cumin. It's a completely different flavor. Right, so that's kind of where we're at now. So we're starting to get into problem management in depth, and that's going to help improve a lot of our services. And obviously, we'll need change management on the back end of that because those problems ultimately yield RFCs, changes to the actual service itself. Quality assurance, customer outreach, you're going to be seeing a lot more of that. We're partnered with MPEO. If you're a customer of DISA, you're going to be starting to get quarterly phone calls, kind of random. About a tenth of our tickets will be identified on any given basis, and you'll get a proactive call from our customer outreach group to ask you how you were doing. Two parts to that. One is, how's the service desk doing? The other one is, what do you think about the service that you're consuming? Because again, that goes back to that problem management perspective, right? We're interfacing with the customer today to day. We'd also like to know, what do you think about Defense Enterprise Email? What do you think about DCS? Hold your comment there. We can talk about that later. All right, but those are the types of things we want to identify. Those are the things that we want to try to get after. Quality assurance, yes, a lot more quality assurance. For the first time with CIC, our agents actually are now being monitored and recorded, and we have a QA group that is lurking in the background, listening to their phone calls, trying to improve it. We actually have an automated agent scorecard now that scores the agent on an agent-by-agent basis, and that feeds directly into their performance evaluation. And then that gives Mr. Akery here in the front row, who's one of my primary service desk managers, who he wants to hold on to and who he maybe wants to shed type of information. So that's good news. So you should start seeing an uptick in customer service and more professional behavior as we go down this road. And a couple other things that we should be noting as part of the CIC suite. Coming soon to a theater near you, voice recognition capability in CIC. So again, the thought pattern here is this. Why talk to an agent if you can help yourself? So we've all had the experience. I call United Airlines. I give them my account number. It gives me my flight data, and it does all this without ever having to talk to me, right? It's all provided over the phone. ID is very similar. If you have your ticket number, we can provide you a status update right there on the phone, right through the system, without ever having to have you talk to an agent at all. It would actually pull the information straight from the ticketing database. So those are the types of things that we're looking at. You'd also be able to open tickets through that mechanism. Now, there are a few downfalls, as Jeff and I were just kind of commiserating about. In some cases, we will have to purposely mispronounce our last name for it to understand. I know when I call United Airlines, I have to say JNIG, which is not correct, but hey, it understands it and it gets me there. So there are some hurdles like that. We'll have to get through those pieces. But again, we're trying to give more capability to the customer base so that they can get those types of things and solve the problem themselves without necessarily having to wait for an agent. That way, the real people are reserved for the more complex problems, the more complex issues, and people can get on with their day. And we've already talked about multi-channel support with chat coming, et cetera, down the road. You see there the 1-800-DISA help. Should mention a couple other items with regards to service desk. CIC is actually now customer or contact management. I have to use the generic name. Is actually now a service offering from DISA. DLA and UCOM are actually in a process of onboarding to the system right now. Vincent Nguyen is the program manager for CIC for externals. So they have a means of enabling people to buy it. Not that I'm trying to sell it per se, but that was part of the JIE initiatives. The thought pattern in JIE was if we could get everybody on the same contact management capability for service desk, we could actually lower costs, and it would enable us to gather metrics so that we could make business decisions. We got through the hurdles on the business case, and actually those first two customers are coming on board fairly quickly. And the cool thing is that because we built SOC in a structure that's very similar to a framework where you can buy into the tool set, but yet we're really not changing fundamentally too badly how you operate, it allows you an umbrella underneath that to function. So, for example, UCOM doesn't have to change any of their phone numbers in order for them to onboard to CIC. We can incorporate that into the CIC build, and they can have their own queue structure. The only experience that the customer really has is a change in the voice. The CIC has a different voice. It's actually kind of funny. I found this out the other day. CIC has on their contract 50 different voice agents. And when we started this whole project, they sent us a sampling. Which voice do you want to use? And these are 50 real people that this is their job, doing voiceover stuff. And so we had to listen to those voices, and we had to pick from them and then decide which voice we liked best. So there would be a change in voice. So that was kind of interesting because I was like, really? That's a job? That's a job. Wow. Sounds like an interesting job, maybe. Maybe not so much. I don't know. So anyway, some people are onboarding for that. Also from a ticketing perspective, Army and DISA have been working for quite some time to try to get over some of the hurdles from a licensing perspective on how we would proceed to go forward. We believe we have a strategy to solve that problem in the next, 10 to 12 months, something along those lines. And so you're going to see a lot more integration between ticketing systems, at least from Army and DISA, as we head down that road, which will help us unify some of the workflows that we're doing, and other services may follow. So with that, I don't know how I'm doing on time here. Right, not too bad. So we want to maybe pause and open it up for questions. Yes? Any questions?
Hi, Drew Akery with Chameleon.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you looked to industry in developing the service level agreement, specifically the expectation that a customer might have when using GSD?
So that's an interesting conversation. I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with Airling C. Anybody? Yes? A couple, maybe? I got 1, 2, 3. Okay. So Airling C is essentially a staffing approach model on how service desk or actually any queuing function would work. And depending upon what the customer is asking for, I want the phone answered in 30 seconds. I want, the maximum wait time to be 3 minutes. I expect the call during a given period, call volume during a particular period to be X, and then defining of that period, right? We can then actually project how many agents we need. The general rule of thumb is you're looking for between 50 to 60% occupancy rate per agent so that you have enough latitude to actually answer the other incoming phone calls that are coming in. Problem is this. A lot of the SLAs that we're seeing inside DoD, they can't answer one key question. What's the volume? So we get a lot, I got to average, I want an average speed answer of 30 seconds, right? I want to wait no longer than 3 minutes, so on and so forth. And then we ask them this question and say, right, but how many contacts do you expect? And there's crickets. And I know it's a tough question, especially if you're not getting any service desk support today and you have no empirical data to go on. So the one thing that everybody needs to bear in mind is that number of contacts is inherently dependent on the stability of the service itself. Going back to that analogy in a bad restaurant, right? Scenario. If your service is really reliable, you could have 4 million customers on it, and I could still manage the service desk with roughly 3 people if nothing ever goes down. And that's the challenge. From a contracting perspective, it creates serious staffing issues. We have other services. We have one that's in GSD right now. Their standard deviation is 39% week to week. That's huge. In fact, on one day we had 1,454 phone calls in one 24-hour period. That was usually the volume for the entire week. So when you're manning and you're trying to man towards the mean, plus or minus 10%, it automatically blows that curve. So if you're a customer that's trying to work with DISA, you need to bear in mind, how stable is my service? If my service isn't particularly stable, we're going to have to manage to the peaks. And this may be problematic for you because it's going to cost you, the one service I was talking about with the 39% deviation, it's costing them an extra $350,000 a year to man to the peak levels. Problem with manning to the peak levels is it creates excess capacity in the system. On the weeks that we have 700 phone calls and we're manned to do 2,900 phone calls, there's a lot of idle time with the agents sitting around. And unfortunately, to again use the restaurant analogy, if I was running a restaurant, I would man to the peaks, I would bring my wait staff in, and then when the crowd didn't appear, I'd send them home after an hour. We really can't do that with service desk agents, You can do that with a waiter. You can send him home after an hour, and he's not happy because he didn't get any tips, and he only got 1 hour of pay, and the pay isn't even minimum wage. So he goes home. He probably even lost money on the commute, right? I know this because I've lived it, right, back in my college days, right? Go in, and they say, no, there's no crowd tonight. You can go home. You can go home. And I'm like, it cost me more in bus fare to get here. Thanks. Appreciate that. You can't do that with service desks. So it creates some problems. So as you're going through this and you're looking to DISA, you're going to have to bear in mind that in some cases we may be telling you you're going to have to man to the peaks unless you can stabilize your service. Problem management should help with that and help you tell you where to search from a service owner perspective so you can know if I can get my service more stable, I can lower my costs. But really that's on the service owner. Everybody needs to kind of remember that. The more stable your service is, the less phone calls we're going to get. Now there are a couple other choices you could do. Not to call it any corporate partner specifically, but if you could go with the Yahoo model, right? The Yahoo model of customer services, you can't call us no matter what. There's no phone number. There just isn't one, right? You can email them, and that's it. And they don't give you any guarantee on when they're going to respond. They do that to control costs. It's not the best customer service model, but they do that to control costs. We have other people inside DoD that are saying, I don't want any wait time at all. I want immediate answering the phone. Okay, we can do that too, so long as you know that's really expensive. So those are the things we need to be ready for as we start going towards this cost-based model of what we're looking for from a service level management perspective. Our recommendation right now is if you have no empirical data, we can make a guess based on the types of services we've seen before, and we need to review in 6 months and see what the base data looks like. 2 reasons. One, I don't want to be operating with manpower that was insufficient to meet the service level agreements and customer expectations. Number 2 is I don't want you overpaying, right? Because we make a guess and your service is much more stable than that and you really only need 1 agent per week or whatever because you get 3 phone calls a week. I don't want you paying for 24/7 FTE support, right? And that's the beauty of Global Service Desk. We can combine those assets to help lower the costs. So, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
got one. Chris Seidel with Millennium Engineering. At various times in the last 20 years, I've led some implementations of ITSM before it was even called ITSM or change management. And invariably, the biggest challenge I always faced is the culture shift with the end users. Mm-hmm. For the last couple of years, I'm used to just calling this guy because he's the one that answered my question, but now you want me to go through a service desk, and I still know his phone number. I still know his personal email address. How did DISA deal with the culture shift? It's always been the biggest problem for me.
Short answer is we cheated. So those, I call those kind of the Mayberry situation, right? Small town community. They know who their IT people are. They know where they sit. They know them by name. They probably even have lunch with them, right? There's not a lot of utility in trying to force people to stop going through them. So what we did was we basically put them on the CIC system and started managing their queue so we could actually monitor what they were doing. The nice thing is that when they go home at the end of the day, they now have extra capability. So it used to be that those people would have to be called in. We didn't turn off any of their frontline support in their location. What we did was instead turned on Tier 1 support capability in after hours. So now they suddenly had something they didn't have before. Instead of having to call somebody in from their home at 8:30 at night, they could call the service desk first, in this particular case in Montgomery, Alabama, and we could probably Dameware and fix the problem without having to call anybody in. That got us over a lot of the cultural barriers with regards to that, and it made the commanders in the field a little bit more comfortable because their support model fundamentally didn't change. It more correctly got augmented. Now, over time, that'll start to shift as they get used to kind of the new pattern because they're dealing with people in swings and midshift that are in Montgomery, Alabama. And as people start to move out and go into other fields, it'll evolve, and they'll get more and more comfortable with these phone calls. Another concept we're playing with, which is similar to this, is how do we do support for the Pacific Rim? The DISA field sites in the Pacific Rim, most of them are fairly isolated. So, for example, if I'm the Korea field commander out there, I've got about 6 people. It's not worth putting a Tier 2 desktop person there. Their desktops don't break that often. However, if you think about this for a minute, because I now can put agents anywhere in the world, there's nothing that prohibits me from putting an agent down there in Korea that answers phone calls generally for the population. But if a laptop breaks, they're dual-hatted, and they can address the laptop. Doesn't cost me any additional manpower. I just don't put them in Hawaii. And in some cases, it's even cheaper, because if I'm doing it in Guam versus Hawaii, the cost is lower. Same thing true for the Alaska field office, etc. So we have those latitudes. We're looking at them each case by case. The goal here is they're going to get better service, or if, at a minimum, as good as. We don't want to create screaming memes and force them to go down this path of they have to call this organization. So does that answer your question?
It does. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So in that model, when you allowed them to sort of still go through the traditional path and gave that person a dual hat, I think one of the benefits of any ITSM system from the leadership perspective is the gathering of those critical metrics. Mm-hmm. How often are things going down? So did you have, when somebody went through sort of the alternative channel to get to his or her answer, did you have the person who helped them enter a ticket later so that you still knew that there was a faulty laptop or a faulty projector or whatever?
Well, actually, no. They followed the same process everybody else does. They opened the ticket right away. The only cultural change for the agents that were kind of in those Mayberry scenarios is that they were often on their own ticketing system. They've since migrated. So when they get the person on the phone, they go through the same steps everybody else does and open the ticket. The only difference is that they're used to dealing with Jim. Jim's still right there.
Okay.
And Jim has to open a ticket first. He opens the ticket, and then he deals with it. So.
Excellent.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I got more time. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you more bad jokes.
Well, I do have questions and actually 2 statements as a user. I'm really happy to see that you're really trying to integrate the help desk response to specific incidents and correlate that information and provide better information back to the change control process and to all the actual people who submit to change control as to whether or not their changes sucked or not. I would like to actually ask a question on that, which is, can you possibly give us any insight as to what the outcomes you're expecting from this integration are? Like, are you expecting to be able to do a real-time rollback if something is sufficiently bad enough? Or are you expecting, how is this going to integrate with your ideal process?
Well, so there's like a 3 kind of pronged answer to that. Obviously, we'd like to get to a point where every change that's coming in has a rollback plan, so that if it's too bad, we can scale back and kind of get us out of the fire. So that's number one. The other things are more strategic. As we build the analytics that are coming out of the canary in a coal mine scenario, that's going to help leadership start to make decisions about where investment is made. The idea here is that service desk shouldn't only be servicing the customer, they should be servicing the service owner to help them make a stronger, better product by clearly identifying where we need to make investment. And in some cases, that decision vector may be even that service needs to die. It happens. There are some services where, the canary in a coal mine scenario is this. The service is bad and no one uses it. If we have empirical data with that, it certainly supports a conversation about, is this something we continue to do, right? And those are some of the key metrics that the agency is looking for. Mr. Montemurano, when we were talking with him about this, we were kind of calling it the kill box. What's the empirical data to identify what pieces of what services are in which kind of scenario? We want to use those metrics actually to define DISA services almost like we do in Gartner by various quadrants, right? Those that are in the upper right quadrant, those are the ones that are doing really good. Those are the ones that we want to continue to push and make investments in. Those that are in the lower left quadrant, we have a couple of decisions to make. One, is that a mission requirement? Is it something we're required to do? No ifs, ands, or buts, right? In which case, then we probably need to spend some time and energy trying to fix it. But if it's not a mission requirement and it's bad service and no one wants it and there's no demand, if we have that empirical evidence, then with clearly supportable data, it'll make the decision to say, hey, we really need to get rid of this thing. Or maybe change the cost reimbursement model. Maybe there's only one user, and it's important to that one user. Maybe it's not an enterprise service. Maybe the only customer that uses it is Navy, and it's really important to Navy. Fine. We've got to change the cost model for it, but they need that empirical evidence of what's really going on in our day-to-day contact. And this is why partnership between the service desk and MPEO is so important, because the Mission Partner Engagement Office has kind of the strategic vision, but we see all of the evidence and need to gather all of the evidence to help them support that decision.
Great. And my second comment was going to be more towards the ability to log directly in and see our trouble tickets, which outstanding. I've been waiting for that capability for years. Have you thought about how you're going to represent that information to the end user? Most of them, you're going to be using an idle process. And there's a lot of terminology that's big and scary, and you see people transferred from a different queue to different queue. Is that going to be represented, or is it just going to be, here's your contact guy, here's where we're at, we haven't solved it yet, but it's still good?
So the idea is, and in the pilot that we're running in SRM today, they can see the current status update. The problem is the current status update is usually not sufficient to answer the question and often precipitates more questions. So part of our customer outreach process is, I've got Tabitha and Kendra sitting here today. Their background is really public affairs and messaging. So part of the drill here is to try to shape how that messaging is conveyed. Now, there's a challenge there. The challenge there is that many of our agents are technical people. But that's a customer service challenge anyway, right? We see this in service desks all the time. You get this mix of people. Some of them are really good at customer service. Some of them are really good at technical stuff. Rarely do you find the person who's good at both, right? And those people you really need to hang on to. That's going to be a challenge for many of our agents, and that's where the quality assurance piece comes in the scorecarding. Is it written in plain English? Something that the customer can clearly understand and won't call about. And that's going to require a lot of massaging and individual one-on-one coaching by our QA group with those agents. Say, if this was your mother and they read the status update, would they understand what you're talking about? Well, no. Yeah, so maybe you want to write it as if you're writing to your mother, right? So those types of things would help. So a lot more work to go there.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep. We're doing on time here. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, I'm going to hang out for a little bit afterwards. And other than that, thanks for coming to the symposium, and we'll see you all again next time in June. Okay.